Sammy Simpson, how are you, man?
I'm good. It's so good to see you.
Likewise, man. It's been a minute. I want to start by just getting a sense of how you got started in radio first, and then we'll get into the creative stuff and we'll dive deeper into that. Could you maybe just give us kind of the rundown of how you fell in love with it and how you got started?
I knew from the time I was around 14 years old what I wanted to do. Really, my mom had wanted to be on the radio back at a time when there just weren't many jobs for women on the radio, and she talked about it. And she was also a communicator. She worked for the telephone company and was an operator. So I had grown up around all this communication. So when I was around 14 years old, I decided that my first kind of idea was going to be was I was going to play music for people. So I created a business to be a mobile DJ, and I always love to tell the story because it just shows how much when you make a decision on something and put that intention out into the world, just how quickly it can happen. And it was just one of those stories I told my friends like on a Wednesday. I was like, I'm going to convince my mom to buy me this stereo equipment, or so I could play music and DJ for people.
Yeah.
And that following Saturday, I went to get my hair cut back in the days when I had hair.
Yeah.
And the guy that had cut my hair had owned this family-run business in town. They ran barbershops and hair salons, and he was just a fascinating guy. And I told him my dream. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna start being a DJ and play music for people." And he said, "Well, I've had a mobile DJ company the last 8 years." And he said, "And I have two events next Friday and Saturday, and you're coming along." So that fast,
Wow, that's
I got into the music business, and then I just started telling everyone I would meet that I wanted to be on the radio. And when I was 16 years old, I got my first job at a little radio station where I would, basically be there from morning till night. And it was very tiny. Not a lot of people listened to it, but it gave me a chance to start being on the radio. So that's how it all began.
You've been such a positive influence on me, both personally and professionally. And I've thanked you many times. And I feel like, it'll take lifetimes to thank you enough for all you've done for me. Because our story together started really, through interning at the radio station we both worked at, in Washington, D.C. How old were you when you thought you wanted to be a DJ? Like, was there a lag? Was it a couple years, or how long did it take?
I was a little young. I mean, it was all around that 14, 15, 16, because I was laying that seed of intention at like 14 and 15. And I got that job when I was 16 years old when I got that job. So I had been talking about that for a while, and my mother was also just a big fan of the radio back in those days. This was the late 80s, and radio still had this real prominence about it, especially locally and in the community. And there was a big FM station in our community, well, really many, but one major one where I grew up that my mother was a fan of the afternoon radio person.
Yeah,
And he would go when he would do the remotes where he would go broadcast live. My mom would take me and we would go and see this guy, and he was
yeah.
quite the entertainer. Like, he would dress up in like Hawaiian skirts, and he was just this kind of kooky, crazy guy. And I just remember, he made quite an impression on me as well. So I thought that looks like a really cool job that you get to kind of play while you work, and
Yeah.
and it just seemed really, so I owe that influence to one, my mom, and then two, the personality's name was Buddy Michaels, who I ended up working for, coincidentally, not very much longer after that. But,
Yeah.
I was planting that seed around 14 and 15. I wrote away to some people. I wrote away to Wolfman Jack, who was a big radio icon back in those days. So I was starting to lay the seeds of, this is what I want to do.
Did you remind, or did you tell Buddy that story when you?
Yeah, I have shared that with those folks, and I mean, there's just, as it was, even from our time coming together, I feel that there's just no coincidences. We've done this thing many times together, and that's what I love about this is that for me it was even in the failures, I realized, how fortunate I was. Because, when I was a young kid in those days, there was a big pop top 40 station that was kind of my, it was my goal. I was like, I would do anything to work on this big rock station. And I wrote away to them, when I was right around 15 or 16. And there was a guy who was the program director there named Big Steve Kelly that, I was this young kid that was not ready for any kind of prime time in any way. But, he took the time to kind of listen, and he wrote me a letter back, and he just said, "Hey, what I want you to do is I want you to take a tape recorder out every day, and I want you to just start recording yourself for half an hour a day, and then put it away, and then come back tomorrow and critique." And it was that method that really helped me just really start to hone my game very early on. So I had just these wonderful connectors, even in something that may have seemed very minutia, that were there helping guide, as we all do, I think.
That's so instrumental. Would you say he was the first influence that really kind of gave you actionable things to do before you were as ready as you could be at the time to kind of get your
Yeah.
feet wet?
Yeah, and I look back now, when I was in those days, I was writing, goals down and things. I just knew, I just knew with all my heart that, this was the only thing I wanted to do. And I had such a passion for it that I was willing to suffer and fail, and be told I was terrible, and all those things that you do in artistry, right? Is that it's, that little AM station, it's funny. There was a guy, the opposite side of that was, which was again another lesson in this, is there was a new manager that came into that building and literally sat me down and looked me in the eye and said, "You're never going to make it in this business. Go get a real job," so to speak.
Yeah.
And I just remember how incredibly disappointed and hurt I was that day. But there was something deeper in me that I knew there was a fire burning, and it was like, it's one guy that's, it's his opinion, and I didn't believe him, and I knew that my dream and my fire to do this business was stronger than anybody telling me I could.
Yeah. And was your desire as far as radio to be on air from day one? Like, is that what you wanted to do, is be a jock?
Yeah, that's the only thing I ever thought I wanted to do was just be on the radio. I mean, that was my dream, and I spent about 10 years in the business of the 30 I've been in it doing on air. But for me, on air was just, I was a good presenter. I was never a great personality because I was still very shy, and I had low self-esteem, and my program directors would always say, "Man, you sound good, the mechanics, you run the formatics, but I need you to kind of pull the curtain back and let us know who Sammy is."
Yeah.
And at the time, I just wasn't ready or willing to kind of push through myself on that side. And that's what great personality does, is that they just know how to open themselves up in a way to be vulnerable. And I'm very much that way now, but at the time when I was on the air, it was just something that I wasn't ready to do.
What was the crippling factor, if you could pinpoint it to any singular, whether it's an event? Again, you were timid as a kid, and it took you a while to open up and be more comfortable in your own skin. But was it something that you could recall that kind of held you back? Was it, fear? Obviously, we all have fears, on many levels. I'm just wondering if there was something that you can recall that kind of held you back.
Yeah, for me, I just don't think I knew myself at the time, really. And as a kid, it was fear, but worse, it was shame. It was like, I was ashamed of who I was, and I was doing everything to cover that up. So how could I open myself up when I was building this facade around myself? So, looking back now, it certainly makes perfect sense. At the time, I was always trying, I constantly tried, of course, because that was my dream, is to be a personality. That's what I wanted to do. But I just didn't know myself at the time. And there was just no way I was ever going to be able to push past the fear of doing that when I didn't know what I was, pushing through. At the time I was still, as we're taught many times, I was still looking out I was looking at these other DJs that I admired or I would mimic or craft or look at mine and be like, oh, how can I be more like them? I thought it was all outside of me instead of inside of me. And that was kind of the disconnect at the time.
Yep. And did you beat yourself up? Did you feel guilt for not being able to break through? I mean, obviously, I can relate to almost everything you said in looking outward before you're finally able to look inside. Did you beat yourself up over that, or did you just kind of put on the blinders and you're like, this is what I should do? And then second, how long did it take before you realized that the solution was kind of inside the whole time and you just, it clicked?
Yeah. It's interesting because what I did was, as much as I wanted to be on the radio, what happened is I started at 16, and then by the time I was 18, I did get that job on that big top 40 station. It just kind of happened, um, and what was interesting about it is here I had kind of put all of this weight on. This is my biggest goal, because I would say to friends, I'd be like, if I could work at a radio station like that by the time I'm 30 years old, I will have made it. I mean, I just thought that was the end all be all. And then here I am, less than 2 years after starting my career. I'm in my dream station. And
Call letters?
But
what are the call letters, Sammy?
WKSI, Kiss FM was the name of the station. And what was fascinating is the PD at the time, who, by the way, was the same director who had written me the letter, Steve Kelly. He sits me down and he goes, I don't want you to be Sammy Simpson on this radio station. I want you to have make up another radio name. And I was really crushed, because I mean, here I was like, I'm a teenager basically, and I'm like, well, gosh, how am I gonna pick up girls being on the radio if nobody knows it's me? Right. But what it did is it kind of did me a favor, because I made up this name Kevin Davis. And then what I did is, of course, I beat myself up, my whole life. I still do. Yeah. But I made a deal with myself that Kevin Davis was going to be this outgoing personality that would always have to be on, and all the, if he was going to be the radio guy, then that's what Kevin, and then Sammy could go back and be in the shell. And that, I kind of created this whole other persona in a way for me to experiment and test while still protecting, holding on to, myself, where I was just still, very, very critical of myself, and just did never think I was good enough, full of shame. That shame is a very hard thing, and it's so interesting how the simplest things create shame, and until you kind of get the awareness around it, you're not going to. I'm well beyond it now, because I have the awareness to be like, when it shows up, I can just kind of honor it and love that. Hey, I appreciate that what you've done for me, but I don't need you to be driving a car any longer.
Yeah. So were you successful as Kevin Davis to put on that show that Sammy Simpson couldn't at the time? How would you?
To the most part, yeah. To the most, I was, but I still wasn't able to open up as a great personality does. I wasn't able to be vulnerable, right? Because I was still protecting myself, even when I was no matter who I was, there was still a protection there that shame kept me holding back more than letting go, because I very much felt like I had to create, and be in control of most things instead of letting go to receive, because what I loved about radio is, way before social media and the internet, I was fortunate enough to start in the business back in the 80s, before all these new technologies came along, and radio was the only immediacy medium at the time. Newspaper and TV, TV would have, a live event here or there, but radio was live 24/7. And it was such an interesting, I look back now and think of how fortunate as a communicator I was to learn on the radio, because it's very much about talking to one, to touch many, of being in the moment. And those are the things that people, get paid millions and millions of dollars in social media influence for today. And it was things that, I felt very fortunate to be a part of, and learning that, because those are just not, that's not radio or social or anything. That's just good communication. And that's,
Yeah,
that's to
yeah,
me
yeah,
what it's ultimately, what great storytelling is great
yeah.
communication.
So to those today that may be listening that didn't love radio as much as, say, you and I did growing up, or didn't understand the, like you said, the immediacy, and that there was just a grandeur, and it had a presence that nothing else, carried. What would you equate that to? I mean, other than social media as a catch-all, is there anything that you feel has an impact on people's lives that's kind of similar to what radio did back in those days, when really it was a huge driving factor?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I really think about the height of any technology is about community, right?
Yep.
And we, from I believe from the beginning of the human race, we've as these hunters and gatherers turned to villagers and then to communities. I think we've looked for ways to kind of disseminate information on a mass way, and that's what we see in technology, whether it's newspaper to even cave drawings. I'm always like, we look today and we think about social media walls, and it's kind of like, well, you go back and you see the essence of those desire to uh, send something forward, and communicating and having a message. And we see those from the earliest of time. So, I think ultimately it's just been about, one, it's just, been about how do we disseminate information better throughout the community to teach and learn and grow. And then two, I think it's individually just about, I equate it to, that one to touch many. I think all of us have that message in us that we want to put out there in whatever way we can. And I think, that's why we see things like social and infinite internet now, and the infinite
Yeah.
information that's happening is so beautiful because, now everyone has the ability to to just show up and kind of put their message out for the community. And I think it's very positive.
Yeah, it's definitely not as singular as radio was back in. Radio didn't have much competition, whereas now, I mean, you could say Instagram, you could say Facebook, but they, if you get into the micro communities and stuff, each platform has a crowd and a community, etc. So, it's fascinating where things have gone, and it continues to grow. Can you maybe, just because I'm the audience being mostly in the Middle East, may not know kind of like the inner workings of radio, just in terms of where you start if you want to be on air. Like I remember, you have a lot of war stories from back in those days, starting out in North Carolina, et cetera. Just how you start running the board first, and then evolve from that into being allowed to actually open the mic and speak, et cetera, to like being a full-time jock. If you could just touch a bit on kind of what that process was like back then.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much in those days they do start you out. You don't go directly on the radio. So what they'll do is teach you how to run the control board or the mixing panel, and you're basically playing songs and identification for the radio station. They call those imaging or sweepers, and that was very much my start. Is when I got my first FM job, they told me I could play music and those, sweepers or imaging for the station, but I couldn't do anything else. And, typically what's happening is that there a lot of folks or a lot of companies are having you behind the scenes make an audition tape of yourself. And, through that audition tape, they're going to listen and they're going to coach you on just the right ways to frame things on the radio. And slowly you work your way on. You'll probably do like over. It used to be there would be live personalities in the overnights, like from midnight to 6 a.m. And that's where a lot of people, when I was coming up in the business, got their start. Is that because it wasn't so critical to have the best personality in overnight, but it needed to have someone to cover it, and that's would be kind of the training ground. So
Yep.
overnight was a big part of that. And now today it's very different because there really are no overnights. They syndicate those, meaning they have just someone do the voice track, and then it's played through a computer essentially, and you don't need a live person there anyway. So now really a lot of folks are they're looking for talent from YouTube and podcasting would be the equivalent to the overnight
Yeah.
opportunity to start out today.
Yep. So, I want to get into being at the right place at the right time. I've heard countless stories of people, you know, kind of waiting in line for that golden opportunity where someone either didn't show up and they were called in to kind of fill in and just, was that part of your story? Like, is that how you got in, or was it a smooth transition where it was very systematic? You were running the board first and then you got good enough, you got your practice time in and then eventually they give you a shot.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little both. For me, it was I got my first shift with just they needed someone to fill like a Sunday morning shift, and then what happened was there was an overnight person that did that overnight shift that wouldn't show up to work or something to that effect, and then slowly I picked up another shift. So it was a lot of times as you get your foot in the door. Um, I did have many though that my advancement was because someone didn't show up for work, and I don't know whatever they had going on. They eventually, if you don't show up for work, they tend to not keep you around. So that was good for me because I was able to just make myself available at any moment. They would call me at any moment and say, "Can you come in?" And I always said yes. And when I got my opportunity, I never missed an opportunity to do more.
Why is dead air in radio such a big no-no? And why are you penalized for it? Like, it's worse than like, what is it about dead air? I mean, I understand you want to be running a tight ship and everything, but is there something about dead air that you can elaborate on, as to why it's really bad?
Yeah, there's two things. I mean, one is, radio has always been what they call a forward medium. That means you always want forward momentum. You're always moving forward. You never want to be looking back, essentially. So, dead air becomes one of those moments of just breaking the forward momentum from a programming formatic standpoint. On the technical side now, in radio, they have a rating service called Nielsen. And the way that Nielsen works is that they encode the signals of radio stations so that there's these devices that look like uh, the old pagers from like the 80s. And they have a panel. Yeah, the people
Meters? Yep.
and they have people wear these and they actually are listening devices, so they track what they're listening, and what it does is how it listens is through the encoder on that. And if there's dead air, my understanding is if there's dead air, sometimes you can't encode, the signal won't encode, so you could essentially lose ratings if you have
Gotcha.
yeah.
Interesting. So we started early on. You reached your dream station by around 18-ish. Are you still in North Carolina at this point?
I've come back to North Carolina recently. As a matter of fact, I've only been back about a month and a half now to come back to media. I had gotten out of the radio business, day-to-day radio business, back in 2010, and did some other things, from launching a couple of my own consulting businesses to going back to corporate America, one with a big publishing arm in New York, the New York Daily News, and then to a company called Entertainment Partners that works with every major film and TV studio out there to do workforce management. So I was doing business development and marketing for them. So a little bit of a departure, and then now coming back to North Carolina to rejoin media as a brand and content manager for a local group here called Capital Broadcasting, who owns just a good portfolio of television, digital, audience development. They do documentaries and also a fleet of about 5 or 6 radio stations.
Awesome. So from being on air, how did you make the shift? Because when you and I met, you were a marketing director. So
Right.
at what point did you make that shift from being on air to doing more marketing?
Well, it happened. It's interesting because it's another one of those things that I always say to everyone: life will communicate what it needs you to do and how to be in the world if you get out of your own way.
Yeah.
And for me, my career in radio has always been a testimony to making your greatest intention present in every moment. And so when I got on the radio at 16, I just said, I want to be on the radio. That was my intention. It was very simple. And sure enough, that first radio job I got, it was a friend of mine that called me up just out of the blue and said, "Hey, you still want to be on the radio?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "We have an interview today at 2 o'clock. My friend's starting this little AM station." I walked over to the interview that day, and I got the job on the spot, and my radio career began. So my intention paid off. So then I shifted my intention to, this business is really fun. I'm going to make it in the radio business, or I'm going to die trying. That became my mission. And so when I had moved away to a big radio station in Virginia here in the United States, and I was on a morning show. I was one of three people on this morning show, and this new management team came in, and they pulled me in and they said, "Hey, we want to change up the morning show, and we only want two people on that show. And guess what? You're the third guy that's not going to make it." And I was, of course, devastated. But sorry, and but they said the promotions director just moved over to take a job on the sales team, and we think we'd make a pretty good promotions guy. And I was very perplexed by it, honestly. I didn't think I was a creative person. I was like, I've never thought of doing promotions, and I was very honest. I was like, I'm just not really sure. And they said, "Well, it's either you take the promotions job or you're fired." And so I was young, and it was my first move away from home, and I thought, the promotion thing sounds pretty good. So I took it, and it just was, just the universe aligning the moons in a way, because that opportunity that I never saw coming for myself turned into just, the radio side of the business, the programming side of the business was starting to get there was a lot of talk of tightening it up, and a lot of the artistry on the radio side was getting more formulaic, and it just was this good timing, because then all of a sudden, I very much am an artist and got into the business for the artistry. And so here now I was in this job with a blank slate. They said, "You can create these great promotions and contests." And I just became a lifetime student of everything from branding and marketing, psychology, writing. I mean, you name it. I just fell in love, and sure enough, it was marketing and promotions is what made me successful in the radio business. It wasn't being on air, which I thought would have been my path when I got into the business.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the station in Roanoke, Virginia, I assume?
Yes, they're called K92, and they were quite they would have been an influencer in their day, in where there's, what we call major market radio stations in New York and Los Angeles and major cities. K92 was this small, it was in Roanoke, Virginia, which was in this small town, but they had this kind of influencer status, is that they had been the number one station for 12 straight years in a row. There was a lot of people that had worked at those stations that went on to work at other bigger places. And in those days, the radio business very much worked that way, is that you would work your way from small and medium-sized cities up into the major market was always the goal, is that you're always on this ladder of trying to get to the biggest city that you could. So I felt, really good about I thought K92 was like one of those good stepping stones to a better career. And I just felt very fortunate that I got to be a part of it.
Yep. So another thing I'd like to clarify for those who don't know much about radio, especially in the U.S. and how it works, with regards to markets. You have a lot of markets in the U.S. Can you talk about how these markets are defined in terms of rank? New York being number one, LA being number two, et cetera. It's just kind of a quick...
Yeah, it's based off population is what they do. So, New York with, I think they call them metropolitan areas. So they'll put it's not only New York City, but it's New York City, Long Island, New Jersey, some counties. So the way it's broken down here in the States with cities and counties is they build what they call these metros around these cities, some big and small, and they rank them based off of, how they've put the population of that. So I think that, for New York, the region of New York that's a part, which is the number one region, is I think it's 12 million people, and then it kind of goes New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington D.C., San Francisco, they're all in there. So all the big cities and all the way down. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina now, and it's grown actually to the 35th market in the country as more and more people are moving in. So, and it does fluctuate from time to time as people move in and out.
I was just going to say, because I remember when I joined, DC was number 6, where it had been as high as 8 or 9 before. And that has to do with population growth or density in the metropolitan areas. Did you go
Right.
straight from K92 in Roanoke to Z104, or was there anything in between?
No, I went a couple of places actually. When I was at K92, I ended up going to Kentucky to work for a radio group out there for a couple of years, and then I came back to K92
Okay.
and was made their operations manager. So I ran the whole organization for a while, and then I went to Washington D.C. And then New York. So Washington was like my first major
Yeah.
city
Top three.
experience
Yeah.
coming after growing up in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So and I thought Washington D.C. would be the largest city I would get to. I was certainly comfortable if that was the case. I never
Yeah.
dreamed of New York, but it happened.
Our friend and ex-colleague Dale O'Brien was the program director at Z104 in Washington. Had you worked with him in radio prior to Z104?
Yes, Dale and I worked together I think 4 times total over the years, and Dale was a guy that was again one of those great connectors for me. When I was a kid, I actually listened to Dale on the radio first before I knew him,
Oh, wow.
and the funny story is I didn't like him. I thought he replaced the nighttime DJ who I really liked on the big FM top 40 I've told you about.
Yeah.
And when he first showed up, I was like, I just don't like this guy. And then I got to work with him, and he was actually a guy that opened a lot of doors for me. He was the first guy that kind of nudged the program director Greensboro at that KISS FM station to give me the part-time job. And then he brought me with him to launch another radio station here in North Carolina. And then I went and worked with him in Kentucky. And then he had become the program director in Washington, D.C. And of course, that was kind of my door into getting that marketing job there.
Yeah. I just want to give some background as to how we kind of connected. So Z104 was this top 40 station in Washington, D.C., and Washington had gone about 5 to 6 years without a major top 40. In the early 90s, hip-hop and R&B was just sweeping. I mean, even your normal top 40 radio stations across the country were playing a lot of early 90s R&B because that's what was popular at the time. So there was such a thirst, and I just remember when Z104 arrived at Washington, it was just something so extraordinary. There was a vibe, Sammy. I know it's hard. You felt it later, but once you're inside the factory, you don't know kind of the impact on the people who are listening. And I just was infatuated with that radio station. I was delivering pizzas at the time. And man, I knew the schedule. I knew like the morning show. I knew like the handoffs. I knew like I was a P0 or a P-1 if there is that. Like a P0 or a P1 is someone who like listens, like what was it, an average of like 15 hours, which for radio is a lot, per week. I loved that radio station, and it just gave me, the vibe was great, boy bands were just starting to resurface, and there was a lot of dance music, etc. So the stationality of Z104 was such a great feel good, and it had an energy around it that really, really infected the whole DC metro area. And I just remember, because this was such a pivotal turn in my career, I don't remember how old I was, maybe 18 or 19. So I've known you, Sammy, it's coming up on 22 years since we've met. And I remember filling out this, internship questionnaire, z104.com. And I was like, there's no way they'll ever hire me. You know what I mean? And I knew nothing about interning. I knew nothing about radios or like the different departments. And so in the questionnaire, it asked what department you wanted to be in. Programming, I thought, was actually like, it's the people who program the radio stations. I didn't know that would be something, of interest to me. I saw sales. I'm like, that's definitely not me. I saw engineering. I was like, that's not me. And I was like, there's this like promotions and marketing here. I was like, I know what that means. I'll just try my luck here. And I ticked the box, and I kind of, put that intention. But in my mind, honestly, I never thought I'd hear back, just because there was that that honest about Z104. I was like, oh, they must get, thousands of applications per day. And, 2 weeks later, Carmen reaches out and she's like, you want to come in for an interview? And I came in and it worked out. Day one, I don't remember actually, no, I did see you on day one. And you're like, so at the time I used to go by Al. So you're like, Al, so what do you do? And I'm like, I go to school, et cetera, da, 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 da. And I'm also a singer-songwriter. And you were like, bring me a CD or, I'd love to hear what your music sounds like. Day two internship. You're like, so let's hear it. I play it for you. Within like 30 seconds, you're like, how would you like to open our Christmas show? Sammy, oh my God, Sammy, I lost my shit. I mean, I was like, I should be begging you. And you're offering me this kind of what was such an unattainable thing at the time. I mean, we're talking about the who's who of top 40, artists. I remember it was 98 Degrees, Shaggy, Taylor Dane, Ace of Base was supposed to be there. And then you took me to meet Dale. And you're like, Dale, listen to this. He's going to be opening our show or something like that. There are so many things I can thank you for. But at the time, I was chasing a career in singing and songwriting and performing, et cetera. I mean, that just set the tone. And you were such a great mentor and teacher and friend. It just, man, it completely changed my life. Like the trajectory. And you say there are no, coincidences or no accidents. I'm just so blessed, man. I am so blessed to have met you and to have you in my life as a dear friend and mentor. And man, I get so emotional talking about it because it changed me as a person. I'm such a better version of myself for having met you and having been influenced by you and your teachings and everything. Like I have a book of quotables that I learned from you. The whole perception is reality. Like, and until then, my perception is. Or, I remember hearing that from you, like perception is reality. And I was like, what does that mean? And then I remember thinking, it was my perception that there's no way they're going to hire me. But the one slight difference in that, action, reaction, singular act that I took was to actually just submit the damn application. That singular thing changed my life, Sammy. And, and then, I started as an intern, then I got into promotions and marketing, doing events management, et cetera. And then you eventually moved on to Z100, which for anyone in radio, especially top 40, is the top of that mountain. It's the flagship for iHeart Radio. It's everybody's dream. And, within months of you going there, you created a position out of thin air. The website hadn't been touched in God knows how many years. So you brought me in as the webmaster at the time. That was what they called people that worked on the web. And we went on to like win awards. It's, you won Radio Marketing Director of the Year. We won for Best Radio Station. But there's something about Z104, Sammy, that felt so, as big as it was, because it was in a major market, it felt very mom and pop. And I feel like the way the pulse of that station, both on the marketing and the programming, was just so tight. What do you think was different about Z104 relative to Z100? Without saying one was better than the other, but what do you think really made that just gel, so cohesively at the time?
I think, and I agree with everything, and thank you very much. What an honor to have been just a door for you, which I think that's all we are for each other. Is, as Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home, right? So I'm happy I got to have walked a little with you as well, and still do. For me, the difference between Z104 and Z100 is, you're right. Both stations were two very different places. There was a different mindset in each. Z100 is just the epitome of, as you said, at the top of the mountain of top 40 success. It would be like being a sports player and making it on a major league team, essentially. But I think for me with Z104, I say all the time is, what made Z104 just have that pulse, I think, was it was fearless. We weren't afraid to fail. And that's, I talked to Dale, who we mentioned, Dale O'Brien earlier, who was the program director at the time, and I was the marketing director. And I say to him a lot, I said, as I've had a chance now many years later to look back and kind of put in perspective what I think was so magical about that place is, is I really believe that we were fearless in the sense of not being afraid to be vulnerable. We would try things. It sounded, amazing. I mean, it had great formatics and all the things that radio does, but to me, it was that fearless vulnerability that really made it stand up. And I think what that did is there was a collaboration and a co-creation there because we were building it. Also, it was a new radio station, and you have a new radio station that or any brand that you're launching. If you're doing a startup versus coming in Z100's case, we came into an incredibly established brand that had a mindset and a formula for winning, and it had worked for a long time. In Washington, D.C., it was a startup. It was, we've got the framework of a blueprint, and it was a very good one. And as you said, there was a great pulse about it. But I think it also had that adventure of building, and I've found that's a few times in my life of launching new products and startups and radio stations. Both are incredibly challenging, and both are an incredible opportunity. But certainly, when you have something, because there's no baggage there, right? I mean, it's like there's no perceptions that anyone's holding on to, and part of the issue with popular music is that it changes every single day, and we see the music cycle will shift at times to where, like in Z104's case, that station was launched as a very rhythmic based station, as you mentioned, and then slowly started transitioning into more of a pop leaning station as you mentioned, Suzanne, as like the boy band started coming back, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and and there was a very big kind of discussion around, oh my gosh, we had launched, and I think the time you're talking about with the pulse of that station was very much too with the when it was like rhythmic, that was a big part of its identity. And then while we were able to steer and have some success in those other ways, I would say that those first couple of years of rhythmic were the quintessential success of Z104.
Yep. How long did it take you to really feel like you were comfortable in your skin as a marketing or promotions director?
The very first day I was on the job at P92 as the promotions director, one of my sales managers ran in and was like, "Hey, we need an idea in like the next hour." And I was very naive, and I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was brand new in the job. And so I just started calling around to some friends of mine. I said, "Hey, I really need to come up with an idea." And they helped me out and kind of saved me in this moment of I was very much confused on what I should do. And from that day, I started keeping these notebooks full of idea starters, and I became very fascinated with ideas. And the more that I read, and I'd read everything, I would attend seminars, I would do everything that I could. So for me, I got very comfortable with marketing and promotions very quickly because I was just such a student of it. I just was feeding myself, information as much as I could, and I was creating, all of these, kind of resources for myself. And I'm going to create, just the best portfolio for marketing and promotions, and then a mindset that, okay, if I'm in a town, I know that the relationship with the community is going to be a big deal. So I spent a lot of time, creating relationships and just thinking big, really. One of my first big successes in Roanoke at that K92 station was there was a big local festival called First Fridays, and they did it in the summer months here, and everybody from this town would show up. They would have live music and food and drink and those kind of things, and our competition was the big presenter of that. And when I came in, I said, I asked the staff, I was like, what would make a difference for us to be a winner in this competition? And they said, well, if we owned an event like First Fridays. So I went out and stole it from the competition. I put together a better business development plan, and I went and created more value than they were providing. They'd kind of been resting. And that was one of my first big coups. And when I got that, I suddenly was like, oh, I can do this pretty well, because I never let anybody say, well, you can't do that because someone's already sponsoring. And I was like, well, if we want it, let's go get it. And that's what I was able to do with marketing and promotions, is I started to find my creativity and just the being a good observer and a listener and a good learner every day, because I could apply all that I was learning and localize it in those places. And through the years, I've just continued to always be a student and be a good observer, because I think that's really how you're a great marketer or brander or communicator.
For sure. I know you're an avid reader. Was there a book at that time that kind of helped mold your style of thinking, or where you got ideas from? Because I mean, I remember your scrapbooks, and I just remember being really fascinated with your handwriting. I was like, man, when I grow up, that's how I want my handwriting to be. You make it so, like, I look at all your scrapbooks. I know you collect all the promotions and all the ideas you have, and I remember really being inspired by that. I mean, Sam, for those who don't know Sammy, he has ideas for days. In my mind, he is one of the most brilliant, creative minds that I've ever encountered. He's just full of amazing ideas, and like you mentioned, you could come up with ideas on the spot that really land well. Not that you haven't, or throughout your careers haven't had ones that didn't do as well, but in general, like, it just seems so effortless for you. So was there a book at that time that really influenced you, or does that happen later for you? Because I want to talk about a book that changed my life forever that you recommended.
Gosh, was there a book at that time? That's a good question. I don't know if I remember one book as much. I mean, there's many books. There was a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of
I
Marketing.
remember we were at Z100, our first boot camp. I think Tom had bought copies for everyone. Believe it or not, Sammy, that was the first book I'd ever read cover to cover, because I moved around a lot, having grown up in France and being originally from Syria and then going to the States. Reading was just such a punishment for me. I love audiobooks, but at the time that didn't really exist. But I was so fascinated with that world of marketing, with you at the helm and Pullman, and, having we were at the Chelsea Piers having our first, boot camp. It was so inspiring, and you're like, you should read this. And just the simple, the stupidest thing is, it was a small book, but like, I felt so accomplished finishing my first book. And that's when I realized, I was like, I'm not the problem. It's just that I really need to have, a huge interest in whatever I'm reading. It's not that I'm incapable of reading, but that book, man, it really changed me forever. And it reinforced a lot of the things that I'd learned from you, which I assume is because you had come across that book. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but that's such an important book for me.
Yeah, no, and I think for me, what it was about that book, Zan, is just, I've come to be a great student of strategy and of just, whether it's business or life, is that, they broke it down, they broke things down in these rules that were, first in wins, so if you launch something and you're the first to do it, typically you will dominate the market if you're doing it well. And, and if you can't be first, then be an alternative to the first. So it was like, in every category, there's a first and there's an alternative, and then everyone else plays for, peanuts, so to speak. And, and what I liked about it is that it really makes you pay attention and be aware that, within all the noise, there's this framework, there's, this observation that can be made. And, and to me, that's what I've always found, that great marketing, great branding, great communication is not so much what you create, but what you uncover. Because, really that, I always laugh and say to my staffs over the years, you may have heard me say, is that when you tell someone something they already know, they will always agree with you.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward, right? And I think it was Reese and Trout that, it wasn't so, that book at the time certainly was very profound to me. And I loved, all the rules, and I thought it worked really well. And people had, translated that into, what does this mean for radio? And I'd read all these different versions of it. But it just, was more of a seed that was planted in me to say, okay, it's not easy, but it's easier when you start to look for the point of it, anything, right? It's like, look for the point of the person, look for the point of what someone's trying to sell to you, and how are they trying to sell it? And when you start to look at those things, I found that there was this little, where's my thing, glistening thread you can pull, and it kind of pulls all the dimensions of it together, and that's where I'm always mining and harvesting from. It's not so much that I'm going to have the greatest idea, as much as I've taken the time to be a great student of marketing and branding, and I love ideation. So I would collect all these ideas, and I just had this suddenly this resource in my head of, I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ideas, and okay, now I'm in this moment where someone's looking, and I see a moment to harvest something, and now put the two together to interact in a way that we can build or reinvent something for right now. And to me, that's really but it's so many books, even going beyond that over the years. There's one of the other ones for me on the personal side was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And if you haven't read that, I strongly recommend.
I've listened to most of the books that, the great books, how to win people or how to win friends and influence people by Dale Carnegie. There are a lot of ones that kind of are staples for whether it's self-help or promotions or marketing. I don't remember if the tagline for 22 Immutable Laws was break them at your own risk or something like that, but that was super catchy. I'm sure at some point, while it'll say, if you can't be first in a category, create a new category and be first in that. Of the 22 Immutable Laws, or, the big ones, were there decisions that you felt interfered with what you should and shouldn't do, and you're like, I'm taking a chance on that? And what, obviously by now you have things that are tried and true. You're like, that works. I love that you're a risk taker. You're like, we're not going to go by the book. Yeah, the law says that, but there are ways around that. Was that hard for you at first? Because in your heart of hearts, you don't do that. Have you had to go against the grain because you had an idea, or you kind of wanted to try something new? Or were there events, or is there anything where you went outside the or you started drawing outside the lines?
Yeah, many times. I think for me, where I was very fortunate is that I'm not formally trained in marketing and branding. My career has been an experience based of just doing it and learning it, and honestly being ignorant to start. And I think that ignorance that I had coming in, and that lack of being afraid to try things is what helped me. And I certainly failed many times, but I never, I always, as Tony Robbins says, no failure, just feedback, right? And to me, that's what everything about radio was, because I had this greater intention to say, I'm going to make it in this business or die trying. So it just gave me almost this kind of, I know that sounds simple, stupid, but it gave me this kind of safety net to where I was like, you know what, I grew up in, such a small way. I'm an only child. I just grew up with my mother, who was also an only child. So I came from this kind of place to where we didn't have a lot. And the way that I did it, Dan, is, I kind of made a deal with myself. I said, I can always go back to that little small town. My mother is loving and would always be welcoming of me coming home. But I hope I never have to go there. But that was my safety net. I was like, I'm just going to try and do this. And I think that so yeah, when you talk about coloring outside of the lines, I did it every time I felt a hunch that it was the right thing to do. Was that always the right thing as I was learning? No, but I just always went with my own conviction and passion that, the thing that I get most frustrated about in the world of formal trainings and educations, that they have incredible value to them, but they also kind of put you in a box. And what I found is that I was, what I loved about radio when I first got into it, it was a mom and pop business. I mean, there weren't companies that owned radio stations, and then it evolved over the years into now there's these mega corporations.
Yeah, I remember the mergers. Yeah.
Frustration has been is that we've we've kind of taken the artistry out of the business, and that's why you see a lot of people leaving the business. And again, it's also new technology. We see now the artists are on YouTube and doing podcasts, because guess what? they create their own rules there, right? There's formulas and framework that we know that work to engage and attract an audience, and those are
Yeah.
tried and true no matter what technology you're on. But I think that's what's happened, from the beginning of time. Again, print, when print first came out, it was very much done by someone that was doing their own thing, and then it turned into companies creating newspapers and more formal, and that's what capitalism is all about, is they formalize these plans to better optimize their revenue. But to me, it was just the artistry of it all. I felt if you're an artist, an artist isn't looking to, be in the mainstream. An artist is very much, the one that's leading that.
Yeah.
And to me, it wasn't. I don't know if I always set out to do those things as much as I was just like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make it, and let's find a way, because it just seemed like a lot of those old formulas and things are, they're overused and overdone, and
Yeah.
and I say to everyone, I'm like, don't be afraid to choose yourself first, and then you'll figure out, just how great you are in that community. Otherwise, you're just going to rinse and repeat what everyone else is doing, and there's no way to stand up or stand out if you're not willing to, take risk.
Definitely. Um, I noticed a common thread with creatives, and that's self-doubt. Um,
Yeah,
exactly. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm doubting myself right now as you're asking this question.
I mean, again, Sammy, we could sit here for hours. There are so many, like, little, you know, like markers that have just shaped my life and the way I think, because, we've either gone through them together or separately and shared them, throughout the years. But so there's a self-doubt and there's the whole imposter syndrome. Why do you think, what causes that, and how do you snap out of it? Because we're all bound to go through it.
Yeah, I think what I've learned in my experience, and I say everyone to, there is nobody ahead or behind. You just are and is, and this is where we find ourselves, and every step brought us to right now. And without the failures and the disappointments and the struggles, we wouldn't be us, right? And
Yeah.
so to me, I've been full of self-doubt and anxiety my whole life, and I covered it in a facade for a very long time, as we talked about earlier. That's why I could never be a great personality, because I was still trying to find myself, and I thought all the answers were outside of me. I thought if I just mold myself enough like someone else, then I must be able to do it like they did it, right? And I was
Yeah.
ignorant of that. But we are our own salvation. Because there's so much great work, great technologies, great books, great videos, great podcasts out there of people that are sharing their, their light. And right now we're seeing a lot of people that it seems, in this crazy year, that a lot of it was about, isolation and self-reflection and all those things that people are kind of looking at right now, to be like, hey, I've done something my whole life, and suddenly the world was turned upside down, and I had to address myself in a way where I didn't know myself this way. I knew myself as a habit or a routine or a job or a role or a function in those things. And suddenly now you go into quarantine and you sit on the couch for 4 months, and you realize that all those things that you thought mattered in your life may not have the same value that they once did. And I think it's messing with a lot of people. But I also find that it's right on time, is that, I think anyone that's kind of risen above had to first kind of go, as we're talking here, we all have to kind of have that moment where something's wrong, what's going on, and I need to kind of go in and look at myself, and however you do it, you find, what's right for you, whether it's meditation or therapy or whatever. And, when you find that moment, I think that's, the doubt is never going away. The anxiety never goes away. That self-talk never goes away. But what you do is you find an awareness to be aware is all. It's like when you're aware of being aware, it's like, and I know that sounds like simple, stupid, but what a game changer when you just
Yeah.
realize that, you're not the actor in this play of life, but you can observe it and suddenly start to look at yourself. You can be compassionate for your human condition and go,
Yeah.
humans have all these emotions and feelings and all these things that are there for great reasons, but they can be used again. We use all these tools against ourselves so much. I did forever. Like I would beat
Yeah.
the crap out of myself internally and just, I thought I was the ugliest, stupidest, worst person in the world. And then I went on this beautiful meditation retreat journey, and I got to meet myself in this journey in a way that, for the first time, it was so stupid. I was just in this journey, and I just started thinking about myself, and I was like, "Gosh, you're witty, you're funny, you're smart," and I just found I opened up this love for myself, and the moment that I loved me is it changed it. It didn't. It's not something that goes away as much as you change it, because now it's still all those little, those experiences that we had that scared us as children, as adults, through injuries, through relationships, whatever it may be. There's still, I mean, they're very powerful experiences and incredibly profound energy. So they're going to poke you, but you just become more in that self-love. You decide, okay, there it is. I can see it. I can acknowledge it, and I can put it kind of next to me. And it's like driving a car. I can put it in the passenger seat. It still needs to be there, but it's no longer driving the car. And that's when everything changes.
That's awesome. I want to talk about something that I've noticed has been there and throughout the years, which is there was a time where you started a company called Tuned In, and you were big on frequency. And it all ties back to radio. Like there's something around those three. What is it about that you think still, I mean, it started early on, but there's something to frequency and being tuned in, Can you maybe talk a little bit about what that means to you and, especially where you are today, obviously, having had the experience that you have and, all the ups and downs and kind of being more at peace with yourself. How does that resonate with you today?
Well, for one, I'm incredibly grateful for the awareness, just because it's such, it's so counterintuitive to the way that we're trained. That to me
Yeah.
is what I come back to all the time. It's like, when you realize that, in every moment there's nothing. There's just nothing. And it's us that choose through our free will that gives life the power, right? The power to choose brings your life to life. And we all give away that power all the time. And
Yep.
and that to me is what radio and tuned in and frequency is all about. Because think about, you walk around your city or your town and you see all these people, and each one of them is their own frequency. But you don't hear what's going on inside of them. As the same, there's all these radio waves in the atmosphere, but notice how when you turn in a particular radio station, you'll pick up that one. So frequency is, very important from that standpoint, because one, it's a reminder as, is that one, you have this ability as a sender and receiver to tune in to yourself, and inside of you are those messages from your own intuition, your own hunches. And I think so many people don't trust themselves to go there first and
Yeah.
foremost, which is that is your salvation. That once you start listening to you first and not listening to the opinion or the compliment or the argument or whatever outside of you, you're going to be a better person in negotiating the world once you get really comfortable in trusting yourself first, because what's counterintuitive about it now, when you get into that center of your moment and you're tapped into that frequency of yourself, and you start, frequency also, the more you plan it, the more, you just, think about anything like an infomercial. The first time you see those silly things, you ignore it. But by the 30th time, you're like, you know what, maybe I could use that can opener, nutcracker,
Right,
ridiculous,
exactly.
because it's just a
Repetition, yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's the idea. It's like planting a seed. It's like, you plant a seed and you have to water it and you have to let the sun come out, and all the things create a frequency that suddenly has it, break open and grow. And that's the idea. You have to plant the seed from the inside. Most of us look outside and look for those seeds that people will plant their opinions of us, and they will tell,
Right.
everything from the moment that you're born is planting these seeds in you for your consciousness to say, this is who you are. You're black, you're white, you're boy, you're girl, you're a certain religion or not. It's like, so I mean, again, we're kind of told from the outside our whole life of
Yeah.
this is what made your identity. But really, when you turn that around and you go inside and you find that frequency and you start to, you'll know it, because I always say, I do this thing called make a happy face, and it was a beautiful message that
I
came
remember that.
through because
Yep.
the whole idea is my mom gave me this poem that said, the life that you love is the one you'll have. The love you share is so beautiful, like the best rainbow ever. Don't ever doubt your happy face lights up the world as it already has in so many ways.
It's
And
so
I believe
beautiful, man.
isn't it? But I believe what she was telling me is that if you want to find where you are in total agreement, is find delight, right? If you've ever seen a 2-year-old that just is lit up in that moment of delight,
Yeah.
you've seen presence, right? And when you're present, there is no future or past, right? There isn't any of that baggage that we bring into the moment to tell ourselves what a piece of junk we are, and
Yeah.
and all those things, because you're just like, when you find that little moment of synchronicity that just lights you up with joy and delight, you're like, oh my God, this is, and every part of you, every dimension of you is all just in that moment. And you're not thinking about where I'm going or where I was or what may hurt me or what did hurt me and those things. You're just here and now. And to me, that's where you'll start to find the frequency, because when you feel that, make a mental note and go, what was it about it? I say that's the algorithm, right? The algorithm is when you become the observer and start to find those little, as you said a minute ago, it's like there's all these mileposts in your life. If you look back in reflection, you'll find that there's a common theme in them when you look for the delight that
Absolutely.
that you had in those moments. And then you can go, okay, well, what was the theme there, or what was the feeling there, or what was the trigger there? And I'm going to bet you, when you find that in your reflection, you're going to see where your free will can choose better as you just plant that seed as a frequency over and over again.
Absolutely. I want to go back 22 years. There was the first time you came over, you had dinner at our house. We were in Fairfax at the time. And I remember my dad asking you what you did. I mean, he knew, but he wanted to kind of get to know more. And I don't remember if you'd answered promotional manager and he understood it as emotional manager, or if you'd actually said emotional manager. And I think he said emotional manager. And then you're like, well, actually, I am that. Believe it or not, my dad has used that line. He's one of he's a big fan of yours, always asks about you and sends his love, by the way. So does my mom. What is it about emotional management? Because in the end, it's all emotions, right? Like,
Right.
And I just remember, like, I used to look up to you, and I still do, obviously, but I didn't know at the time that managing people is an art, right? And I thought you were so good at it, but I remember you telling me, we were in conversation going to the beach somewhere, and you're like, I don't necessarily enjoy managing people. And then we got into like a really deep conversation, but something really stuck with me throughout the years is the whole emotional manager, or managing emotions and expectations. And I thought you did that so incredibly well, Sammy.
Thank you.
How does that play into what you do today, whether it's with your children or at work or on a personal level? Can you maybe just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, and it was, I've always said it was not the promotions department, but the emotions
Yeah,
department,
yeah,
because internally and externally, it's all about, emotions. And I think Seth Godin had a great one years ago where he said it's the thrill of possibility, the chance of recognition, and the something of anticipation. So I would always say anticipation is the secret sauce, right? And that's what that's what emotions, are all about. It's like, are we driving good emotions and looking to create the light and create that happy face? Are we managing hurt emotions or broken emotions? That tends to be, that's what you do as a manager and a leader, is that you're constantly, it is an emotions job, because everyone is right where they are, right? It's like some of the smallest decisions can create the biggest disappointment for one person, while everyone else thinks it's right. So I always say you have to meet each person where they are, and you try to plant seeds. I have 3 sons, and what I say to them is there's 2 rules only in my house, and that is respect and consideration. And they go, well, what does that mean? And I go, well, you get to explore and find out. But you be respectful to the everyone, for the greatest good of myself and all concerned. That's respect. That's the way you want to make your choices. And you want to be considerate in a way that, if you're getting caught up in gossip and emotions, guess what happens? It's like adding fuel to a fire. So let's have consideration to know when I don't need to be participating. And I think that's very hard, because people are social animals and they want to participate. And, and that's the biggest piece. So, so I think it's just meeting each person where they are, clear communication, and not trying to, answer the question, but so they can find a better question in it, because the better question for them is how they grow. Trying to answer something is how they continue to, kind of run on that wheel, hamster wheel of life, not really getting anywhere.
Yeah. So I remember in New York, when I used to come to visit after I'd left Z100, we would go to Brothers Barbecue in the West Village.
Always.
Now that you're in North Carolina, you're back home, so barbecue should be available. Have you found a new spot yet?
I've found a couple, but it's interesting that I thought my worry was I was going to gain about 40 pounds moving back, because of all the great food in the South here of this part of the United States. But I've tried to be pretty good. Yes, there's plenty of good barbecue here, and it's on most corners here. You can find a barbecue place.
Well, listen, I can't wait to have barbecue with you in person after this whole, COVID stuff goes away. It's been a long time. I haven't seen you in a year and a half. It's been way too long, and I can't wait to, have great conversations with you again. And I'd love to have you on the show again, hopefully in person sooner than later. And I really appreciate your time, Sammy. I cannot thank you enough. Again, you continue to inspire, and I love what you do. I'm such a big fan, man. Thank you so much, Sammy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Much love.
Have a good one, man.